Okay, I'm interviewing John Caldecott, the recently fired Director of Human Resources. Well, not so recently. How long ago was it, John?
It was in January 2015.
Yeah. Well, I call that recently.
It's definitely recent.
So,
It's recent to me.
Third time's a charm, right? This is the third time I've interviewed you.
Mm-hmm.
So I just have to ask this question. So what the heck are you doing? Why are you retired now? You have your shorts on. You're happy, I think. Why are you doing this now?
I am happy, but the circumstances of me leaving, I think about fairly frequently. I don't. And from an employee perspective, people should be free to ask questions. People should be free to raise concerns. People should be free to engage in the complaint process without being harassed, retaliated, and fired. And so I'm as much thinking of myself as I am for other people in Newport Mesa that I left behind that are in fear about pursuing things they have concerns about. And frankly, the people I hear from and hear about, they are afraid to differ with anything the administration says. And that's wrong. It hurts morale. When I came here 10 years ago, when I came to the district, what impressed me is that employees were turned loose to be creative, to take risk, and that the consequences would be, it didn't work this time, try it again another way. They were not harassed for asking questions. And
Who was the superintendent then when you came?
Rob Barbeau.
Okay. So, you had 94 pages, and you sent it to the court, and the court they didn't really deny you, but they just didn't take it on, right? And this is what I think. Let me summarize,
Sure.
okay? This is what I think the judge's decision was. He divided it into two issues. One was the suggestion that he made all part of the 94 pages that you make part or all of the 94 pages public, and the other was a hostile work environment. Actually, that was your request to him. Sorry, I may mix that up a little bit. Mm-hmm. He punted on both things, saying that you already controlled the pages, so the court had no reason to release, and that you could. And the hostile work environment issue did not really come under the court's jurisdiction. How am I wrong?
You're not wrong, and let me take those one at a time in responding to those, because I have appealed. I think everybody saw that in the newspaper. The judge did not decide in my favor, and the two reasons given by the trial court were, as you said, one, it's moot from a California Public Records Act point of view because Caldecott already has the records. And two, that is an internal personnel matter that only relates to a hostile and abusive working environment. I made a legal request for public records. Mm-hmm. And any person in California, or in fact through the California Public Records Act, may make that request. Mm-hmm. I am then entitled, I believe, by law, and this law, by the way, ended up in the Constitution of California, so it's pretty fundamental that public has access to public records of public agencies. Is it moot that I have the records? In the appeal, there are citations to court cases, and I'll keep this simple, but it has already been decided by a court that you don't need a reason. Doing it on a whim is just as good a reason as anything else. Mm-hmm. You don't need a reason to go and make a public records request. And two, the court cannot consider what you're going to do with the records. Those mm-hmm. issues have already been decided. I don't believe that the trial court interpreted the law correctly. I did not give up my rights to the Public Records Act because I have possession of records. Mm-hmm. So the bigger issue is if a member of the public wants those records, mm-hmm. what are they going to do? Come to me and say, John, it's your job to release the records?
Right.
Well, no, I don't want to release the records, but that's not fair. Yeah. So I can't get through the logic of the trial court's decision. I believe that the court should apply the standards in the Public Records Act and release whatever individual records qualify to be released. As far as the hostile and abusive working environment.
Oh wait, can we get to
Sure.
that in a minute? Okay, could you? Okay, so therefore you're now appealing, right?
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about that and when that might actually? What's the news on that?
The appeal was filed last week. It is what they call an extraordinary writ review by the appellate court, which is located in Santa Ana. And that goes quickly. These are not appeals that take years. So I have already been advised and received a document yesterday from the court that the district has been invited to respond to the writ that was filed in 15 days. So that's pretty quick action. I think that it will take a few months to get to a final decision from the appellate court.
Mm-hmm. So I'm assuming the appeal is exactly what you said. Why wouldn't the public be allowed to see? Why does the public have to go through you to see what is written there? And
Well, I believe the act, in most cases requires a record by record review.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope the court will see that through the records already that have been provided to them, that would be the appropriate avenue. The other trial court issue was that it's only related to a hostile and abusive working environment, and that is not true. As you know, on I think our second or third video, I revealed 6 areas that were included in the complaint against the superintendent, which are the records involved. Mm-hmm. The other areas of malfeasance, of how salaries are paid to administrators, questions I had about the salary structure that were never answered. There were many areas that had absolutely nothing to do with a hostile and abusive working environment. So that I hope is subject to further review by the appellate court.
And so you think they have, all right, so the district has 15 days. So I wonder how long that's going to take before some sort of decision is made.
Well, as I understand it, the next step is for the court to decide, once they review the district's response, if oral argument is appropriate or something, or whatever other action they might consider in the process to reach a conclusion.
I understand you have breaking news about the STRS request, and you got some sort of answers. Could you tell us about that?
Sure. I've used the process for public records. I've seen records come across my desk as an employee. I understand how it works. Because of all the secrecy and strange things and response and getting fired related to the questions I was asking about administrative salaries and STRS, I made my own public records request to CalSTRS, which is an outside agency independent from the district. I believe they did the right thing as far as how they obtained records. They sent me records, and I have given a press release out related to those records. And here's the 2 things that I observed from a couple of the records that I found. There was a case involving former Superintendent Dr. Hubbard that ended up being audited by STRS, and they made a couple of findings. One of them, or really one finding I'll focus on, and that is that the district took one form of salary that was a $20,000 life insurance annuity and moved it into a merit pay increase in 2000, I believe it was 10-11. STRS found that to be, in the common language, pension spiking. Yeah.
Which means
that they disallowed it because it was so close to his retirement. They found the purpose of that change was to increase his retirement allowance. And so they disallowed it. And in those cases, when they disallow it, they force the employee to repay money that was given to them under the assumption that they qualified for it. Mm-hmm. So that was one observation from the records. The other thing that really concerned me was when I went back to the board approval of this $20,000 life insurance annuity, I couldn't find it. I found the addendum where it was in a contract addendum for the superintendent. When I went to the board item, it only said that they were increasing the superintendent's salary by 5.5%, equal to that received by all other employees, and this was 0809. And so I looked at the addendum, it's the exact same date. I don't believe anybody would have figured out that a life insurance annuity would result in really a $20,000 tax-deferred form of compensation each year for the 3 years of that contract.
Each year?
Each year, $60,000 total. I found that to be deceptive. When I was asking questions and when I couldn't get answers, this is the type of thing that the district would want to keep from me, because I don't believe it's ethical. And I don't believe it was transparent. I don't believe the board should have done it that way. The board president signed off on it, Martha Fleur at the time, and that was implemented. Then that salary was converted to something else 2 years later. I'm not sure that was fully exposed, but I haven't seen all those records.
It was converted into what?
Into a merit pay increase, which is a category of pay that might qualify you for retirement allowance. So that became the issue. But creating it and then redistributing it, I don't believe was done properly with proper transparency.
So Dr. Hubbard then, did he, oh no, he had to finally pay this back. Is that, the SCRS caught it?
Yes, he did.
We think. We're not sure.
Well, they have control over the allowance being issued, so they subtract it from the allowance they send the employee, as I understand it.
Okay.
So I have exposed that. I believe it relates to my case.
How does it relate? That's actually going to be my next question. So your case is really against the current administration. I mean,
Yes,
those are your issues. So how does this relate, really?
Well, it occurred, the actions taken really occurred in November of 2012. Current superintendent is here. The current CBO is here. And I think it shows the lack of transparency. It shows the problems within the district's salary structure. And there may be other issues. But I found this could have been something that was kept from me when the district, remember, one of the core issues in my complaint against the superintendent is I did not understand and I questioned why the district was moving to change the salary structure for all certificated management.
Could you just explain how that was changed?
Well, it hasn't been changed.
Make it,
They were attempting to change it. So in simple language, there are about 3 forms of pay for certificated managers: professional growth, merit pay, and base pay. The push to change it was to make that all one. Also, there's doctoral stipends, but the push was to make that all one cell on a salary schedule. And my questions were, why are we doing this? What is the problem with the current structure? And I could not get an answer. And I started to find things like this.
The current structure then was that when everything was listed then, so the public, and I'm assuming all this would be public, the public would actually be able to find out how much of that money that was going to that individual was merit pay and so on, right? Is that correct?
They could.
They could. And if it was in one little number or one large number, then it would be not very transparent.
There's probably 2 sides to that argument. I did find that the information going to STRS was somehow consolidated into one number. So it came from HR system as 3 or 4 numbers. When it got to STRS, it was one number that looked like a base salary. I don't know how that impacts what STRS does.
So
and that may be another issue.
So that could have a real effect on somebody's retirement, correct?
It could be.
I mean, could be.
Of course, everyone knows STRS is auditing the district and management in particular.
And when does that due?
From what I've heard from STIRS, there will be a final report in September that follows a draft that the district can respond to in about June.
Mm-hmm. So the
And
district
that would be a public record on the final actions of STIRS
in September, you think?
in September.
Okay. Okay, switching subjects. All right, you talked about a hostile work environment, and I know what it looks like for a teacher. It can involve, but not limited to, the following: criticism in front of the teacher, in front of other teachers, parents, children, change of work environment like changing classes, the grade someone teaches, intimidation, targeting, undermining with parents and other teachers, and worst of all, undermining with the students. But what does a hostile work environment look like to administrators?
It looks about like that. All of those factors and those terms I would use to describe what was experienced when I asked questions. I've read some of the comments that were emailed to me by a top administrator about you'll have to get a set of whistles if you're going to pursue this, essentially, and you're going to hurt all your colleagues. And acknowledging that there was a problem, which I have been unable to absolutely nail down. So there were comments like that. But I will tell you, when I filed the complaint and prior to, when I raised questions about salary schedules and other issues, the superintendent stopped talking to me unless he had to. It was very uncomfortable. I was put on the spot as often as possible. It was very uncomfortable, and I believe it was intended to be uncomfortable. And I find that to be disturbing as an HR person. I have a pretty high tolerance for abuse, but it exceeded my threshold, and it far exceeded what we'd expect for a principal or any other supervisor in the district. You know, we need to allow differences of opinion, and we need to help people find the right forum to do that in. But this was really inappropriate. Mm-hmm. And as I said, the hostile working environment was one issue that affected several members of cabinet, but the other issues were substantive questions that dealt with malfeasance. And those are things that my own integrity will not allow me to cooperate with if I think they are inappropriate or wrong, mm-hmm. And people could be harmed.
Mm-hmm. So when the superintendent behaved this way toward you, was it catching? Because sometimes, with the teachers, sometimes it is. If somebody's being targeted, then they kind of go along with it, or they just stand back because they're afraid, or did all those things happen, or none of them?
Well, I would describe as the superintendent condoned a lot of behavior that should have been stopped, mm-hmm. and he let it go, despite the fact that I requested and others requested that he guide the conversation a different direction, mm-hmm. when it became very uncomfortable, mm-hmm. and people were on the attack, that he step in and facilitate. Mm-hmm. He didn't. And I believe now that was very clearly intentional. And I hate to say it, but I have the classic HR situation is when people are made to feel uncomfortable so that they're driven out. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that went on for how long?
I would put it at about a year and a half, about 6 to 8 months after he started, so maybe almost 2 years. Mm-hmm. Close in proximity to the STIRS decision on the case I was just talking about, mm-hmm. which was November of 2012. He started in August, so it's probably a little bit after that. But I will tell you, I learned quickly that the superintendent expects obedience, mm-hmm. and he confuses that with loyalty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Does if a superintendent, this is a hypothetical question, okay? So if a superintendent thinks that some administrators are not doing their job, or that the way he wants them to do it, or the way it is expected to be done, or whatever, what recourse does the superintendent actually have? He can't fire them for no reason, but then he did you. But so what? I mean, no, seriously though. I mean, when if a superintendent comes to a district and things are not going well, and and there have been districts like that. Newport may be one of them. I don't know. What can a superintendent do?
Well, of course, that's my area of expertise in HR, but people may not realize this, but principals and administrators, unless they're under contract, which I had a 3-year contract, they can be released March 15th of every year. And if they are not noticed, then they get paid and continue into the next year. If they are noticed, they can be returned to the classroom or terminated at the end of the school year without cause.
Does the superintendent have to have a legitimate reason for doing that, or can he just doesn't like the color of your hair, or he doesn't like the way you talk to him, or he doesn't like the way you're responding, or you've asked too many questions or something? Does he have to have a reason for this, or can he just do it on a whim?
In some procedures, like the one I just described, there is no reason required. But it is quite clear from court cases and other liabilities that even though you don't have a reason, it doesn't mean that you can terminate somebody, for example, if they're a whistleblower, or if they have a disability, or if they are of a certain race. You cannot discriminate or harass people that have protections by law, regardless, and that applies to anybody. That could be the substitute that's worked one day in the district, a temporary teacher that has a temporary contract, or a tenured teacher, or an administrator. All of those laws apply. So even if you say there is no reason, which I was terminated without cause, if there's a pretext, that can be questioned.
You were terminated. You were fired literally hours after you filed the request to the court. So I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. But why do you think this happened, and why so abruptly, and how smart was it to do that?
Well, this is one of my purposes, is I don't believe employees should be subjected to this type of conduct. I believe it was partly a spur of the moment thing, but remember, in October and December I filed a complaint against the superintendent. The board responded to that complaint December 10th. I have other documentation that's all included in the first Public Records Act, or other records that led directly up to the day I was terminated. People might be interested in the fact that on that day, or the day prior, I received instructions from the superintendent that I was to do something the following week. By the next morning, I had written a retaliation complaint, another one, to the board. And by 3 o'clock, the writ of mandate for the Public Records Act hit the court records. By 6 o'clock, I received a text message that he was recommending my termination. This was the 22nd of January. He was recommending it on the 27th of January. I suggest to you and anybody else who has seen all of the records that I can produce that I was fired for being a whistleblower and for free speech, and for pursuing concerns that were improper governmental activity and good faith reports of improper governmental activities. That is what the Whistleblower Act covers. I believe the superintendent thought he could get rid of me and I would go away somewhere and not ask any questions if he terminated my contract and paid me out for the term as agreed. That's not going to happen. I'm not through. And until I'm through with the issues, each one of them, I will continue.
I think we'll stop on that note. I believe it. I believe you. So I believe that you're not going to stop. So we'll probably meet again, John.
I'm sure we will.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. Appreciate it.
Thank you.